Tune in to our platforms every other Friday to watch the Exeter Biweekly Report, with recaps of recent events, updates from town departments, and messages from nonprofits in your area. If you head to our website, exeternh.tv, we invite you to sign up to our newsletter to receive monthly updates about new content, upcoming meetings, and more. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch Exeter TV and hope that you tune in to our other content as well.
And we can begin the meeting of the River Advisory Committee. First thing to note is that we have a sign-up sheet on the white table, and if you're coming from anywhere and you want to sign in, there's information there that you can put down. For the recording secretary's benefit, we need to do a roll call. So let's start that in and do
Sure.
a roll call.
Warren Biggins.
Rod Borden.
Lionel Ingram.
Richard Huber.
Nico Papakostendis.
Trevor Matera.
Okay, and I believe that's a quorum, right? We can
Yep.
go ahead. All right, we're in good shape. So the first order of business is to look at the minutes from December 21st. And I wanted to ask if anybody had any comment or corrections for the minutes?
No.
Seeing none, I guess we could entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Lionel moved and Nico seconded. So, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? All abstaining?
Aye.
Carl is going, or no, right,
Warren.
Warren is going to abstain. Okay, but that will approve the minutes, so we're good for that. Next, we can ask Paul Lasich to come forward and update us on river-related issues.
Good afternoon, Paul Velocity's town engineer. Before we get started, we got a new face here to introduce. Steve Cronin is the Public Works Director. He was at the Public Information meeting, but this is his first River Advisory Committee appearance. I want to start off with river issues, the siphon project.
Can I interrupt for just one moment? Dan Jones has arrived, so we have one more person here. Okay.
Okay, this is an update on the siphon project. I think the last time that we chatted about this, we were doing the work that the special town meeting for $3.5 million of constructing a new siphon barrel across the river. Well, that work was going along really good this time up until Tuesday. Tuesday, there was another disconnection between the drill rod and the reamer head. The process that was taking place, the pilot hole was drilled. The first ream that took it from 6 to 12 inch was done. And now we were in the process of boring out the hole or reaming out the hole to 18 inch. We were about 500 feet across, and we had that disconnection again with the drill rods. And it was from the, on the Swayze Parkway side of it, and that was the side that is doing the twist to the reamer. What we found out today is the drill rod was broken 160 feet from the drill rig on Swayze Parkway. And that was just about in that interface between the soft materials, the glacier teal, and the hard ledge. So the contractor is trying to do a reconnection of that part where it broke. And we were able to see that it was a weld in the drill rod that broke. So there is an attempt going on right now where they're trying to recapture the end of that drill rod and make a connection on to that. That's the current game plan. There'll be more activity after that, but hopefully they can, that is successful in removing and starting all over with that 18-inch borehole. So more to come on that as we find out more information. Well, one other thing I want to say about that, though, that there are no additional costs to the town because of this circumstance. We had renegotiated with the contractor last year that it would be a lump sum payment for this next borehole, so, or the installation of the siphon pipe. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll go on to what we have on the agenda today.
Okay.
So when I was trying to figure out what we can do at this meeting, I remember back that the last time we had a presentation to this particular group, I think was in November. And we were working with a certain set of data at that time. And then the feasibility study came out at the end of February. And then a public information meeting was shortly thereafter. Some of the, I'm good? Some of the things that we were looking at changed a little bit. So I want this group, the River Advisory Committee, to know what happened. Maybe you went to the meeting, maybe you read the report on the website, but what I've asked today is for VHB to hit the highlights of what was different from back in November and what is in the feasibility study. So we're a little bit ahead of time. The agenda today is we'd like to go through this update for you guys. At the end of the presentation, open it up for questions for the River Advisory Committee. And then after you're through, open it up to any other public comments. Today is the ending day for public comments. We have the email address that has been advertised that you can send comments to, or you can send them down to my office also. So today is the last day for public comments. Any presentation we do, I think we're required, but it's also nice to note funding partners. We've seen this slide plenty of time. This is one of the slides that started the public presentation, the public information meeting. A lot of competing interests on those highlights down below. Everybody weighs those competing ideas differently. It doesn't make one person right, one person wrong. I say this just so that different views are allowed and they are acceptable. This is a slide that you're going to see several times. And the purpose of this slide is to help with some of those changes that have gone on and help to organize us. And I'd like to start off that in pointing out that there is a current dollar figure for options. Options are at the top. And there's a future column there also. And I think it's important for us to know the difference of those two items, because there is a recommendation that we look at the future costs for climate change, and our consultants will talk about that. And when they talk about that also, I'd ask them to elaborate a little bit more on all of the various storm events that you read about in the feasibility study. It starts with something as low as a 2-year, or even a normal flow event goes up to a new year flow event that we weren't used to hearing, a 1,000-year event. I've had comments, and I've heard comments that some of those storms are not used quite correctly in where they're supposed to be used for. And so there'll be an explanation of that. So enough of me. I want to ask Jake San Antonio from VHB to come on up and continue with the presentation, starting with what I just said. And we have Stephanie from VHB too. You've seen her plenty of times. And then we have a relic from the past, Pete Walker, that you saw many times on the Great Dam Project. Okay? Thank you, folks.
Great. Thank you, Paul. As Paul said, Jake San Antonio with VHB. I'm going to go through a number of slides. Many of these, if you went to the public meeting, will be a bit of a repeat, but there is some new information in there. Once we get into the impact analysis, I will be handing over portions of that to Pete Walker. And then after Pete goes, Paul will come back to talk about next steps. So as Paul mentioned, I'm going to start off talking about the hydrologic analysis, which are the design storms or the flow rates that we use or talk about in the feasibility study. Start off, just to orientate ourselves, the graphic in the bottom right corner is the watershed to the Pickpocket Dam. The red line denotes that watershed. It's approximately 76 square miles in multiple towns. So to support the feasibility study, we developed a rainfall runoff model. So a model where you simulate rain falling on the ground and how that water transforms and runs into the rivers and turns into a flow rate. The common flow rate we talk about is cubic feet per second. So, if you picture a cube of water, how many of those cubes are moving per second in the river. The current dam is a high hazard class dam, which with the current regulations require the dam to pass 250% of the 100-year discharge with no manual operations and 1 foot of freeboard. So that was really the beginning goal, was to determine what is that 100-year discharge. And on the table, based on our modeling, that came out to just under 4,000 cubic feet per second. You'd multiply that value by 250% or 2.5 to get to what the design discharge is for the dam based on the current regulations. So that brings us to just under 10,000 CFS. The other flow rates that we talk about in the feasibility study are the normal flow. So the normal flow is, not under rain conditions, but the mean or the average flow in the river throughout the year. And we've determined that to be about 136 CFS. The other flows that we talk about are the 2-year flow. And the 2-year flow is important because that is, it is what is commonly used in the industry as a bank full flow. And the bank full flow is the channel forming flow. That's the flow that forms our rivers where the majority of the sediment transport is occurring and is what is used for the design of natural-based channels. So we determined the 2-year flow to be about 500 CFS at the dam location. The other flows are the 50-year flow. The 50-year flow is important because that, prior to the reclassification of the dam was a low hazard dam, and that is the design storm for a low hazard dam. The 100-year discharge we talked about already as the basis for the high hazard discharge. The 100-year flow is also the design flow for a significant hazard dam. And then, as Paul mentioned, we also looked at how these flows could change with climate change, and we followed the New Hampshire coastal flood risk guidance, and that essentially guides you to increase the precipitation depths by 15%. So that is what we have done, and reran the models and came up with what we're calling the future 100-year flow to build in that 15% increase in rainfall. That gives us a flow of just under 6,000 CFS, so almost a 50% increase in discharge with only a 15% increase in precipitation. And, at that level of rainfall, the ground is already saturated. There's not a lot of abstraction happening. So once you get that additional 15%, it's essentially all making it to the river. And then on top of that, for the future design storm, that 2.5 times the 100, we get to just under 15,000 CFS. And then during the drafting of the feasibility study, New Hampshire DES started rulemaking to make some modifications to the dam safety regulations. And one of the major changes was on the discharge capacity to a high hazard dams, which the rule is proposing changing that to the 1,000-year storm. So we did look at the 1,000-year storm and estimated a discharge of 13,900 CFS, which falls between the current 2.5 times the 100 and the future 2.5 times 100. So we still felt that in the feasibility study, keeping the current and future kind of brackets that potential 1,000-year storm to give magnitudes of cost for the different options. Here's some photos from the Mother's Day flood. The Mother's Day flood was thought to be around a 50-year storm, a little bit probably higher than that, closer, but not a 100-year storm. These pictures were taken during that event. In these pictures, you can see the water level, flowing over the spillway, and in these photos, overtopping the low-level gate control and fish ladder entrance. And this is important because in the next slide, you can see this is existing conditions of the dam. In the bottom right corner is a section view through the dam. This area in black denotes where that low-level outlet is and fish ladder. The gray denotes the dam. These are the top of abutments that you can see in those photos. And you can see that the 50-year storm overtops the fish ladder entrance, but does not overtop the abutments. So it gives us some confidence in the hydrology estimates that we came up with, that what was observed during that storm is matching what our models are telling us. So moving on to talk a little bit more about existing conditions of the dam. There's an existing fish ladder and low-level gate. The low-level gate, during our feasibility study, we found that that gate is in an inoperable condition. We did a visual inspection of the dam and found the dam overall to be in fair condition. We did note the inoperability of the gate, but the concrete and the earthen embankments were found to be in fair condition, though you could argue that overall the dam is in poor condition because it doesn't pass the required discharge capacity. The current dam is made up of many different components, being the concrete spillway, the fish ladder, the lower training weir of the fish ladder. and the earthen embankments that connect into the concrete training wall abutments. Now I'm going to step through each of the alternatives we evaluated during the feasibility study. The first alternative was raising the top of the dam and abutments to be able to pass the design storms with 1 foot of freeboard and no manual operations. The graphic in the bottom left is, again, a section view through the dam with the current 100-year water surface shown. The blue shows the current design discharge, and the red showing the future design discharge. So the top of the dam would need to be raised to 72.7 feet based on our calculations to be able to pass the future design discharge with 1 foot of freeboard. This alternative, we're showing the earthen tiebacks being raised in these 90-degree elbow patterns. There were some concerns brought up during the public meeting from the abutting homeowner about not loving this configuration and liking it better when it went straight across and across the driveway. The town has gone out and staked what that alignment may look like. And in the final feasibility study, we'll be carrying a version where this is extended straight as opposed to having the 90-degree elbow. Here's a couple of views, the next 2 slides, on some renderings that we put together on what this alternative may look like. The view on the left is existing conditions, and this is a view essentially looking from the Crossroad Bridge. The view on the right is the rendering. You can see the raised earthen component and concrete training walls in our rendering. To hit that 72.7 elevation, it's raising the crest of the dam by almost 7 feet. The existing abutment's at 66, and this would need to get up to 72.7. Here's another view. This is looking from River Right. Crossroad would be off to the right in these photos. Existing conditions on the left, rendering on the right. In the background, you can see the raised concrete abutment and earth embankment. So the cost estimate for raising the dam, as we're recommending using the future rainfall as the design storm for the design, that would work out to a cost of just under $3.6 million, including the capital cost to construct the dam and the current day replacement costs for the dam in 30 years and 30 years of operations and maintenance. Second alternative we looked at was increasing the spillway capacity. To increase the spillway capacity, we looked at putting in a labyrinth weir. So a labyrinth weir, in this view, as you can see, it looks kind of like a zigzag, and here's a representative photo of examples of a different labyrinth weir. This is essentially replacing the existing concrete spillway with this zigzag pattern to increase the weir length and be able to get more flow over the dam at the same elevation. This option would not impact the fish ladder. That would still be able to be maintained as is, but would still require increasing the height of the dam and the training weirs on both sides. With the future rainfall condition, the dam crest would need to be raised just under 3 feet. Alternative 2 did have a high cost. With capital replacement and O&M costs, we're estimating a cost of $10.8 million. Alternative 3 we looked at is an auxiliary spillway. This option is maintaining the existing spillway, maintaining the existing fish ladder, raising the earthen embankment on river right and on river left, adding a cutoff wall and auxiliary or emergency spillway to allow safe passage of flows when the abutment elevations are overtopped. This could be considered a stabilization in place option, given a place once the dam's overtopped to safely pass without dam failure. The auxiliary spillway option costs for capital replacement and O&M were estimated at just over $3.8 million. Alternative 4, this alternative is full dam removal. So this would include complete removal of the concrete spillway, abutments, the lower training weir, the fish ladder. It would include preserving the islands just downstream of the dam, but removing the majority of soft sediments, reconstructing a channel through that, and stabilizing the banks upstream. Here is a plan view that we put together showing what this option could look like. This is a grading plan. So on here, the gray hatch represents the current dam, so the spillway, fish ladder, lower training weir. Those would all be removed. The two vegetated islands between the lower training weir and the spillway would be preserved to create a split flow scenario. The soft sediments would be removed. A natural nature-like cobble mix would be replaced to help stabilize the channel. Here's some renderings of what that option may look like. Again, on the left side is looking straight on the existing dam. The rendering is on the right side, looking at all of those components of the dam removed and the two islands preserved. Another view, this is looking from river right, looking across the dam. The rendering goes on the right, showing that split flow and with the islands preserved. This option, we put a cost together for the initial capital cost. There'd be no replacement costs, as this would be made back to natural and wouldn't require replacement. There would be some operations and maintenance costs for the first few years after dam removal to monitor the stretch and that is typically required as part of the permit conditions. And the cost for this is estimated at just over $1.5 million. Some of the other alternatives we looked at was alternative 5, which we were calling the no action or hazard reduction. So for this, as you all know, the dam is classified as a high hazard dam, and that is based on during a dam breach scenario of the 100-year event per the New Hampshire DES Dam Safety Guidelines, when that results in an increase of flooding of greater than 1 foot over the first floor elevation of a residential property. So what we looked at this is what could be done to reduce that hazard classification. And to be able to reduce that hazard classification, the town would either need to purchase or raise the residence the one residence that's impacted over 1 foot over their first floor elevation. Based on the current assessed value, that home is approximately valued at $544,000. The other components that were pushing towards high hazard was that during that event, water elevations were moving above the ground elevation around 4 mobile residential structures. So those structures would need to be stabilized. So we put together a rough estimate of what a foundation under those 4 structures would cost, and we're estimating that around $80,000. If the town were able to purchase those properties and stabilize those manufactured homes, the dam would still be classified as a significant hazard dam, because during that dam breach scenario, there was overtopping of Kingston Road, Route 111. And as that's a Class 2 roadway, it would be considered a significant hazard. With the significant hazard, that does lower the design discharge. As we talked about, the high hazard discharge requirement is 2.5 times the 100. The significant hazard discharge requirement is only the 100-year storm. So to be able to reduce it further to low hazard, we'd either have to replace the Kingston Road Bridge to increase the hydraulic opening, or raise the low and high chord so it's not overtopped during that dam breach scenario. We did look at, based on some comments that we got during the public meeting in February, whether we looked at combinations of these. So we did, since then, looked at, if it was a significant hazard dam and you were able to acquire and stabilize those properties to reduce it to significant hazard, and you only had to raise the top of the dam to be able to pass that significant hazard storm, we're estimating the improvements to the dam to be around $1.3 million. With the property acquisition and stabilization, that brings that combined option to just under $2 million for that option. We also, looked at what if you were able to raise the Kingston Road crossing and reduce it to a low hazard, the dam still doesn't meet the low hazard 50-year discharge requirement, because it doesn't have 1 foot of freeboard during that event. So, even with reclassification, with any of the options, you still have to do some work to bring the dam into compliance. And then we looked at alternative 6, so lowering the normal pool. So this would be selective demolition or partial removal of the concrete spillway. And we looked at how low that spillway would need to be reduced to be able to pass the design discharge. The table in the bottom right summarizes those elevations. So the current spillway is at 60.9 feet. It would need to be removed down to an elevation of 56.5 to pass the current discharge requirements, and 53.9 to pass the future rainfall requirements. With this partial removal, lowering normal pool, there would be impacts to the fish ladder, and that would need to be redesigned as part of this option. This option would have similar changes to the ecosystems upstream as dam removal, but without the full benefits of restoring the river to a free flow condition. So in the feasibility study, we talk about all 6 of those alternatives, but ultimately we eliminated alternative 2, the labyrinth spillway, due to the high costs. We also eliminated alternative 5, the hazard reduction one, as in all cases with the hazard reduction, no action, something would be required, some changes would be required at the dam site. And then alternative 6, lowering the normal pool, had the changes to the eco stream upstream and impacts to the recreation, but without the full benefits of dam removal. So that was also removed. And we only carried alternative 1, 3, and 4 through the impact analysis. Now I'm going to talk more about the impact analysis. The first few slides I'll go through talk about changes to the water elevation and the water levels within the impoundment. This first graphic is showing alternative 1, which is raising the height of the dam. It also represents alternative 3. What I'm showing here is the 100-year water surface elevation. The impoundment elevation during this event stays approximately the same. What I didn't mention during when I talked about alternative 1 is alternative 1. To increase the discharge capacity, there was a sediment island that is now vegetated and formed upstream of the spillway. In all the alternatives where the dam is kept in place, we did include removing that sediment island to improve the discharge capacity. So we do see with this option a slight decrease in the 100-year flood. We're right at around the dam site, we're seeing a 0.4-foot reduction, which tapers as you move upstream. There'd be no change to the impoundment water levels under normal flow conditions. This is looking at dam removal. So this is under normal flow conditions, that 136 CFS. The light blue in the top graphic and in the bottom are showing the normal pool elevations, which are being driven by that 60.9-foot elevation of the existing crest. With the full dam removal, we're expecting a 9.4-foot decrease right around the dam site, which decreases as you move upstream. Right around the confluence of the Little River is where we start to see no change with dam removal. This is, again, with dam removal. That last slide was on normal flow. This is on the 100-year storm. So with the 100-year storm, with dam removal, you're seeing a reduction of the predicted peak water surface elevation by 7 feet in the immediate vicinity of the dam, tapering to no impact by the time you get to Hague Road. So, one of the impacts that we looked at was impacts to sediment transport and potential for, with that sediment transport, what is the quality of the sediment that is in the impoundment. So to help us evaluate those impacts, we did a sediment sampling, developed a sediment sampling plan, and then went out and took samples. We, in total, took 5 samples with to support this analysis. 3 were upstream and 2 were downstream. So sediment sample 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 being further upstream. The good news is the majority of the sediments were found to be fairly clean. There were no concentrations of pesticides or PCBs. There were PAHs, or polyaromatic hydrocarbons, found in all the samples. And those are pretty commonly found in waterways. They are contaminants that are mostly due to our motor vehicles. Arsenic was also detected in the samples. Arsenic was the only contaminant or analyte that was found to be above New Hampshire DES soil remediation standards. But though they were found to be elevated above those standards, they are believed to be background and are naturally occurring in this part of New Hampshire. All in all, once we got the sediment samples back, we also looked at the ecological risk and found low ecological risk for metals and PAHs and a moderate risk for arsenic, in sediment samples 2, 4, and 5, and a moderate risk for PAHs in sediments 3 and 4, which are downstream of the impoundment. So in general, what we found is that the samples actually downstream of the impoundment were found to have higher concentrations than upstream, which isn't always the case with dam projects. We also looked at sediment transport. So as part of that sediment sampling effort, we also did grain size analysis. And the sediment samples we took were really geared at those soft sediments. They weren't, they weren't taking the cobbly or gravelier samples. It was really focused on that softer material that could be transportable in the event of a dam removal. So using those grain size analysis, we looked at what velocities would result in incipient motion, or what velocity would cause those softer, smaller materials to start to move. And for this analysis, we looked at the normal flow and that bank full flow, that 2-year flow that I talked about earlier, as the channel forming event. And what we found is with dam removal, about 3,700 feet upstream, with those smaller grain sizes, that material could be mobile. With that being mobile, we also looked at where that may settle out. And we found that the velocities in the system reduce where they wouldn't be mobile anymore in the area around Route 108, Court Street region. And that would be the main area where sediment could drop out post-dam removal. With sediment transport, as I said, we focused on that really fine particle size, not on the firmer stuff below that soft sediment. So with dam removal, there would have to be further investigation on the more coarse material and whether any of that would move and whether any additional stabilization would be required. But in general, we feel that with proper drawdown and seeding the exposed banks post-dam removal, that there's really no sediment concerns. The movement concerns, the velocities in these areas are fairly low and would be stable with normal vegetation holding them the banks together. Along with those analytical results during our sediment sampling, we also did some sediment probing to look at what are the depths and quantities of those soft sediments. What we found is in the active channel portion of the impoundment upstream, that those soft sediment depths are really low. I mean, they're 0 to 2 feet. There's not a whole lot of buildup. We did find that the depths get deeper as you approach the banks where the slower moving water is. We weren't able to get as close to the dam as we wanted during that investigation due to that inoperable gate and the flows at the time of that effort. It really wasn't safe to get any closer to the spillway crest. So we also looked at infrastructure impacts with both the dam in and dam out alternatives. With the dam modification, there is increases in flood levels in storms above that 100-year storm. We did find that there would be decreased flood levels during dam removal. Luckily, there's not a whole lot of infrastructure in that upstream impoundment. And as this is a run-of-the-river dam, the discharge going over the dam and with the dam being out would be essentially the same. So impacts to bridges downstream are not a concern. As I just mentioned, as we were talking about sediment transport, with the dam out option, there would be increases in velocity. So there is potential for more erosion, especially prior to the banks get revegetated and stabilized. And there will need to be some more investigation in that if that's the alternative that the town moves forward with. With the dam removal, as I previously talked about, the water levels in the immediate impoundment during normal conditions would be reduced by over 9 feet. That would decrease the buoyancy of those soils that are currently now within that impoundment. So we would see some settlement post-dam removal. The majority of that settlement would be, the majority of that settlement would be seen in the alluvium areas. We'd see less settlement within the glacier till or glacial deposit areas where the homes that are abut the impoundment are. With that drawdown, the effective stresses of the soils would be increased. So when a soil is fully saturated, the effective stresses are looser. So the embankment slopes and abutting the river are more apt to slide or have less strength with the full impoundment, with the impoundment drawn down. If that is drawn down properly, slowly, the effective stresses would actually increase, which would increase the stability of the overall river banks. I did mention some settlement. The settlement would be slowly over time. We wouldn't expect it to be differential. We'd expect that, the entire area to settle at a very slow rate. We also looked at water supplies, and for this investigation, we looked at about a 1,000-foot buffer from the impoundment. We reached out to both Exeter and Brentwood, looked at the public records to identify all the registered wells. What we found was that all the wells that we had records for were down into the deep bedrock aquifer, not in the superficial aquifer that would be impacted by dam removal. The majority of those deep bedrock wells are in the 200 to 500 foot deep range, and really we're not expecting any impact to that aquifer. We did get some comments that those are not just drinking water wells, that some of those wells are geothermal wells. So we did look into that further, and the geothermal wells that are in record also go into that deep bedrock aquifer, and the injection wells associated with those geothermal systems also go into that deep bedrock aquifer that would not be impacted by the reduction of the impoundment. We also looked at, there were questions regarding the use of the impoundment water as backup water supply. So we did look at options or how long would the impoundment be able to provide water to the downstream water intake across from Gilman Park. And that intake has a max capacity of about 2.3 CFS. Assuming that you're able to take about 5% of the river flow and pump it into the town system, that equates to a flow about 46 CFS that you could meter from the upstream impoundment during those drought periods. And what we found is at 46 CFS that the impoundment would drain in about a day and not provide a good long-term backup source for drinking water for the town. We also looked at the crossroad landfill and how dam removal may impact the overall groundwater flow patterns. And what we found is that, the hydraulic gradient would change and get steeper, but the overall contaminant load to the Exeter River would remain the same as it is today. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Pete to talk about the rest of the impact analysis.
Thank you. Pete Walker with VHBM, an environmental scientist, familiar face to a few of you. I've worked on the Great Dam project as well. Picking up with cultural resources, the location of the Pickpocket Dam has been used historically by settlers since the mid-17th century. And it also, there's evidence that there was Native American use of the river prior to European arrival in the Northeast. So there's been a dam in this location for quite some time, or use of the river. The current dam was built in 1920. It was modified in 1969. As part of this feasibility study, we had some of our architectural historians complete what's known as an individual survey of the Pickpocket Dam, essentially looking at it from an engineering and a historical significance. That material was submitted to the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources, and the Pickpocket Dam has been determined to be eligible for listing on the National Register. What that means is that any work, whether it's modification or removal, would require further review under the federal, the National Historic Protection Act. That's what's known as Section 106. I also mentioned that we had a local archaeologist conduct a review of the river valley and the immediate area around the dam, and they did identify 2 areas that are deemed sensitive for pre-contact sites, meaning Native American cultural deposits. There's also a long record of post-contact use of the river valley, so it's considered archaeologically sensitive. And in the feasibility study, when we looked at the various alternatives and how they may affect the dam, we do feel that all, except for the no action alternative, which was not carried forward, but most all of those alternatives would have an adverse effect on at least the dam structure itself. Dam removal would also warrant further review of potential impact on upstream archaeological resources. With regard to water quality, the Exeter River just downstream of the Pickpocket Dam is identified. The entire river reach is classified as a Class B water. This segment of the river downstream of the dam is listed as impaired for aquatic life uses, and that's attributed to low dissolved oxygen levels. The impoundment itself is it is not listed as impaired, but that is primarily due to a lack of information, a lack of data in the impoundment. Based on the data that does exist, we conclude that the presence of the dam and essentially the impoundment the dam has the effect of lowering the levels of dissolved oxygen within the impoundment. We know that it disrupts the sediment transport process, and it's not just sediment, but it's also organic material moving through the system. So it impounds not just water, but sediment and organic material. That increases the temperature of the water in the impoundment. It also increases the growth of algae and vegetation, which contributes to the low DO that's observed in the impoundment. The dam modification alternatives would really maintain the status quo. They wouldn't significantly change the water quality either upstream or downstream. Dam removal, we do predict that it would lead to a net benefit, a positive benefit on water quality within the river. With regard to fisheries and fish passage, there is a discussion of the resources, primarily focus on the diadromous fish, the river herring. So alewives and blueback herring are both present within the Exeter River. One important thing we want to stress, and we'll probably address this in a final feasibility study, it's not just those diadromous fish that matter. There are other fish species that are also present within the river. And the presence of the dam is a barrier to both diadromous and resident fish populations. And we tend to think in terms of upstream fish passage, and the dam is a barrier to upstream fish passage. The fishway, the technical fishway, is a mitigation of that, but that technical fishway is a filter. It is not 100% efficient, even though Fish and Game does their best to operate it effectively so that it minimizes the impact on the river. It still is a barrier to fish passage. So the dam modification alternatives, again, would not change that, condition. So we'd have essentially the status quo with regard to a segmented river, if you will, with a discontinuous or discontinuity in the river presented at the site of the dam. The dam removal does present an opportunity to remove that barrier and to improve connectivity, aquatic connectivity, up and downstream and through the dam reach. We've calculated there's about 14 miles on the main stem and some of the main perennial tributaries into the main stem that would be free-flowing. We do know, we heard at the public information meeting, and we've seen comments raising questions about some of the fish count data. So what we're looking at here in the table is some data that we extracted from a recent New Hampshire Fish and Game report. And the suggestion has been made that the dam is, these numbers seem to undermine the idea that the dam is a barrier. And there's just a few things we need to bear in mind as we're looking at these data. Mostly, it's important to understand those counts are the fish that actually make it to the fish ladder. So it doesn't actually account for the fish that may be traveling up through that reach of the river and maybe even to the bottom of the dam, but not ascending the fish ladder. So it's very important to understand that. Unfortunately, the best data that we have on the number of fish below the Pickpocket Dam is represented in these recent time counts. I do think it's fair to say the number of fish in the Exeter River has, particularly diadromous fish, has expanded greatly since the Great Dam was removed. With regard to natural resources, again, there's a number of wetland systems and wildlife habitat. There's a large amount of habitat and wetlands in the impounded reach of the Exeter River above the Pickpocket Dam. The dam modification in the feasibility study, we report essentially status quo, wouldn't represent any significant changes. Dam removal would have some significant effects, some very substantial effects. We've talked about improved fish passage. We've talked about improved water quality. The feasibility study discusses a concept known as the natural flow regime. So what we know about how rivers work is when there is a lot of variation, there's a lot of up and down in terms of the flow, that creates a couple of different things, but primarily it creates structural diversity within the river that is important to driving ecological diversity. So the dominant paradigm in managing riparian habitat is this natural flow regime. We see repeated patterns of where rivers are more diverse and more functional, where they're free-flowing in relation to an impounded condition. But there's no arguing that, so what we're looking at in this figure over here, and the figures are relatively small, they're produced in the feasibility study at a scale that you can read the annotation and whatnot, but this is the main stem, the blue is the river, the yellow is the dam. These green areas are these large floodplain systems that are, floodplain wetland systems that are adjacent to the river. And one of the key findings of Jake's hydraulic results, and he's shared some of this, obviously the closer you are to the dam, the more substantial the change would be in terms of the depth of the flooding and the width of the floodplain. So we have a large change in hydraulics near the dam, and then as you move upstream, it essentially diminishes to zero. So there's really no effect above this point here. So these wetlands, we would draw the conclusion the dam removal would have very little effect on those systems. However, the closer we get to the dam, the more likely it is we would see effects on the wetlands. One really important thing to understand is these areas that are represented as present-day wetlands were wetlands before. Our interpretation of the landscape is that those were wetlands before the river was impounded. So removing some water depth from them does not necessarily eliminate the wetland. What it does do, what it would do is it would change the frequency that it's inundated, and that would be translated into changing cover types. So instead of having open water or aquatic bed habitat, we'd have emergent or scrub shrub. If we have scrub shrub, we may see over time a shift towards a forested wetland habitat. So we wouldn't predict dramatic changes in the overall amount of wetland in the system, but there would be likely over a period of decades some overall reduction in terms of the total wetland footprint, but it would not eliminate wetlands. One other note here, invasive species. There are invasive species in the river corridor. If the dam were to be removed, we would need to develop plans for monitoring and managing that resource. With regard to recreation, we have observed there is a relatively high level of boating, fishing, swimming. There is snowmobiling within the floodplain, even skating and passive nature activities like bird watching. There's only one sort of formal, as far as we can tell, one public access on the river. That's up at Hague Road. So we can see, push the right button here. So this is essentially what we would refer to as a car top access to the river. This is all the way up at Hague Road, which, as the hydraulic model indicates, would be relatively unaffected. So changes approaching zero. So that actual area would be relatively unaffected. However, we would see, in terms of a boating resource where we have a lot of flat water in the impoundment, depths of 6 inches a foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, those depths would be reduced. So any opportunity for we've used a trolling motor within the river. The river would be shallower, and it would change the type of watercraft that would be able to access it. Again, dam modification wouldn't really have any significant change. The other thing we wanted to point out is it's related to the recreational opportunity. All of these brown parcels, see the main stem of the river, this is all conservation land. This reach of the river is highly, highly conserved through either public ownership or private conservation easement deeds. Shifting gears slightly, just in terms of process with regard to public involvement and public comment. Paul, I think, mentioned at the outset that we published the feasibility study towards the end of February of this year. We held a public information meeting to discuss the draft study with the public on February 27th. And there is a public comment period that has been fairly active. We've received a relatively high number of comments, which is encouraging. We did ask for comments to be delivered by today. So we will be assessing those comments and updating the feasibility study accordingly. But the other point we wanted to make is there's been a number of meetings. See if I can go back. There we go. The initial letter of deficiency was issued about 13 years ago. So there's been periodic conversations within the community about how to respond to that. We really began in earnest in 2020 and 2021. That's really when we started having regular public meetings with this River Advisory Committee. And I think we've met with you 4 times up to today. This may be the 5th meeting since we've been developing the assessment of alternatives. We had also met with the select board in October. So we are listening. We are eager to receive public comments on the feasibility study. We're not in a regulatory review at this point. We're still considering alternatives, although there has been a vote to move forward with a grant application. We're still considering alternatives. Regardless of the alternative, there would be a future phase of design and permitting where there would be additional opportunities for public involvement. There would also be the requirement for formal public notice at that stage. So that's what would drive that. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Vlasic.
So this is one of the slides we started with. I told you you'd see it several times to help with the discussions and also with the alternatives. Now we come to, and we put a title on this one, the cost analysis. Eliminating the labyrinth as proposed, you have dam in or dam out scenarios. And we heard the recommendation to look at the future flow amounts or the future dollar amounts. So for a dam-in project, you'd be looking at somewhere between $3.6, $3.9 million over that 30-year explanation that Jake was given. On the other hand, if you had a dam removal or a dam out project, you're looking at more than half that amount. So as I stated at the very beginning also, there's competing interests. This is just one, the financial component of that. So next steps. Public comment period ends today. We'll be taking notes at this meeting. And also there is the email address to get comments or questions to, pickpocketdam@exeter.h.gov. We will review public comments and revise the report as necessary. And we also are bound to issue a final report. Now, the final report that we have to issue is driven by the grants that we have. We've already closed out the coastal grant. That was the $40,000. We are still working within the context of the clean water, stormwater grant that we got for $100,000. There is a specific scope of services that we said we would do. We've got to finish that particular scope of services. If there's more services, it can still happen, but we have to finish the feasibility study that was financed partially through the stormwater grant by the end of April. So that's what's governing the push for this. There can still be lots more conversations about it, but for us to hold our end of the bargain, we have to finish that report. I will be looking for the River Advisory Committee to make a recommendation to the select board on how to proceed. But, and once you do that, then it would be in the select board's hand of how to proceed from there. But I'd still like to have one more meeting before asking for that. And the purpose of the next meeting is, there's a lot of talk of all these options. But there's a tremendous amount of effort and activity that will still need to happen after you choose what you're going to do. So I've asked VHB, with their experiences on dam modifications, also with their help with us and our experience of dam removal, to try to put together what some of those two options would look like. And then notice I didn't say which one of those or the dam modification projects, but in general, what's the steps that we would have to go through and about how long some of that would take. So I'd like to do that at the next meeting. And
So you're thinking April 18th, so it's before the 30th. But is that what you're thinking, next third Thursday of April?
no.
Are we talking May?
No, I would like to find a date in April if we could. But the reason I say that the third Thursday, no, is because the head project engineer, Jake San Antonio, will be away on vacation that week. And I think it would be important for him to be here for that meeting. That doesn't mean that we can't have the meeting on that date. It is my preference that we try to find a different date to have that.
Shall we propose April 25th, next week, a Thursday? We'll try that, okay.
So now, if I went back to the agenda, it is for the River Advisory Committee to ask questions, have comments, and then we'll see what we can do.
Can I just say something, Mr. Chair? One of the comments we received from folks that were unable to attend the February meeting, which I attended, and would be available on the 25th, is I believe that might be school vacation week. And I wouldn't want to do that twice to folks that may want to. So we could take that into consideration.
Okay?
April 25th, school.
I believe it is, Mr. Dean, correct? Yeah. Just, it was a complaint from folks in February, and I just, in good conscience, would not want to repeat that if we can avoid it.
We'll have to talk and figure out what the best solution.
We don't have to come up with a date today, do we?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it'd be nice if we could, but still,
Very good.
we'll
So-
work on it.
Comments, questions?
Yeah, I would like to hear if the members of the committee have any comments or questions. And can we start at the end there with Warren? You can pass if you don't.
When we talk about dam removal, do we have any idea how long that process might take?
The actual construction portion of it? There'll be one construction season.
Okay.
And that means probably starting July 1st and going through till end of October. And the July 1st, if I remember right with the Great Dam project, that was governed by the alewives and the hatchings and that sort of thing, and we had to wait to July for that. And then that's when we started lowering the impoundment slowly as recommended, if we choose dam removal here, that process.
Okay. Other than that, it just seems that the dam removal option is the most financially feasible, and it has the greatest benefits to kind of the surrounding ecosystem and the water quality. So that's kind of where I'm leaning right now.
I have no comment at this time. questions.
Okay, Lionel?
Brentwood, how do we bring them into this process? Do we do it through the system that exists there in the Rockingham program? Or how does that happen?
Would you like to comment on that?
Hi, Russ Dean, Town Manager. So when we did the public meeting, we did outreach to abutters in Exeter. What I've been doing is noticing the town administrator over in Brentwood, who's then been responsible for getting the word out to different people in Brentwood to be part of the process. So that's how we would be engaging them at that level.
That engages the people, but how do we engage the governments? In other words, the votes on our side are all going to be, well, take it out. That's 1.5 million. But the people on the Brentwood side of the house say, well, that impacts us directly. Is there some way that we can then get the people over there involved in thinking about what to do? It seems to me an option might very well be, well, okay, you guys have a warrant article over there, pay for so much, and we people over here in Brentwood would have a warrant article would pay more, or pay a different amount. And therefore, the two warrant articles come into an existence, if they both passed, maybe we end up keeping the dam in place. To us, the decision is clear. You get rid of it for 1.5. Brentwood might want to say, look, we would be willing to kick in 1.5, 1.7 in order to keep the dam in place and also to have the recreation area, which many people talked about when they were here at the last session. So there's not only an abutter interest, there's a town interest. And how are we going to work with that?
So whatever comes out of this process, one of the things that we can do, again, is communicate to the town of Brentwood. And as I said, I've been communicating through my counterpart over there. And then they would be the ones to communicate that up to their select board. And then if their select board had any particular interest in it, they could definitely communicate it back to Exeter. That would be easy enough to do.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
If I could just follow up on that, if I may.
why, sure.
It ain't getting to them. It's not getting the select board.
Okay.
And I don't know if, whose interest or why, but I happen to have input from the select board that they're hearing very little about this.
Well, as I said, I've been emailing the town administrator over there, so she's my counterpart, and it would be up to her to deliver that message up to the board. I can copy the chairman of the board on the next email. And
I wish you would.
also pick up the phone
Why do we do that?
and do that.
I wish you would, because I am another chairman.
Okay. Very good.
Okay, for my comment, I would just like to assert that we're looking for the best solution to the safety problem related to the dam. And we want the best solution, and to get that best solution, we really do need the input of all the stakeholders. So we are not ignoring any issue that is critical. So I would just say, and invite whatever, whoever wants to comment and express their concerns to come forward and do that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, as the select board rep to this committee, I'll reserve my privilege to speak when it comes to the select board.
Okay,
Thank you.
Excuse
Dan?
me, what did you say? I couldn't hear the back of your head.
I said
As much as I like the back of your head.
as the select board, not as much as I like yours. As
Yeah.
the select board rep to this committee, I'll reserve my privilege to speak when it comes before the select board. But further to that, I would say that Mr. Dean has been communicating with the town manager in Brentwood, but to your point, we will, as a courtesy, include as a CC the chair of the town of Brentwood Select Board. Thank you.
Dan Jones, do you have a comment and a question?
I, as the board is aware, feel that this is totally being ramrodded through with make-believe numbers. The 1,000-year water flow, the 200-year water flow. For safety, we've got to do it. For whose safety? If indeed the Kingston Road Bridge is an impediment, the way the bridge was here in town, I don't think it's up to the town to replace that bridge, as the engineers said. I think it's up to the state. If the state didn't design it to pass the water flow, I think the state jolly well could change it. I mean, that seems to be one of the problems, is that there would be an impoundment behind that bridge which would endanger the home there. The mobile homes which face being partially inundated, were, as I recall, built on filled floodplain without a permit, which was granted after the fact. The owners may not be aware of this, people who own the mobile homes. The land has changed hands a couple times, but yeah, I remember when that battle was going through with Attorney Shaw up in town meeting floor crying for them. And the chance of, this danger, I think, is remote. There is just the fact that it is from either the state end or the federal level, they want to have all dams removed. And I don't know why. Certainly it doesn't appear the fish are interested in going up any further. They stopped. None of the fish, which are supposed to run free, have gotten as far up as the dam. And I feel it's a totally false, the whole thing is a false premise, and we're being railroaded through on it very rapidly. I was not present, unfortunately, the day the study was presented and took the vote, bang, bang. Really, there's been no, it was voted we want to do it before we'd had a chance to see a 30-page study. I remember reading it, or going through it as best I could. But I'm very concerned with the entire process and the concept and the whole ideas behind it.
Thank you for your comment. Trevor.
Yeah, just a couple of questions, first of all. So first, you had mentioned that velocities in the river, you don't see any need for anything more than a vegetative stabilization along those banks?
Based on the data we have currently, yes.
That's great. Yeah, great. That's, first of all, great to hear. And the accretion, can you talk a little bit more about the sediment transport and the accretion around Court Street?
Sure. So, yeah, if I go back to that slide. Sorry, it's farther back than I thought. So this graph that's on the bottom right here, we've got red and blue lines. The red lines are the velocities under normal flow. The blue lines are velocities under the 2-year or approximate bank full flow. The dashed versions of those are how they change with dam removal. So as you can see, the dam is approximately here. With dam removal, we're seeing no change in those two. The dotted and the solid are on top of each other. Upstream, we're seeing that the velocities are going up, especially up in the immediate area right upstream of the dam. There's smaller increases that taper up to Hague Road. The green line that is in here is we looked at the water depths and velocities at every cross-section within our model, and based on those, calculated what is the critical velocity or the velocity that would start those small soft sediment particles to move. And so what we're seeing is with those soft sediment particles, and again, I want to focus that that's really just on that soft sediment, that probing that we did and the samples we took for the quantity. we looked at, that in this region would be mobile. The velocities downstream of the dam remain high where those small particles wouldn't start to settle out. Once you get to Crossroad, you start to see that the river gradient reduces, the velocities get lower. So in those bank full and normal flows, the velocities get lower than that critical velocity or incipient motion velocity. So we'd start to see that material that may be mobile post-dam removal would start to settle out in that vicinity.
Excuse me, sir, you said Crossroad at the right end. Is that Court Street?
Court Street, sorry, my bad.
And do you imagine that would produce some kind of issue that needs to be mitigated at the time?
I don't think that would create an issue because with the dam removal and that design that we proposed, the majority of those soft sediments would be removed and disposed of, and a stable bed would be in place. And we'd be, post-dam removal, as we would envision the design would be to stabilize the new exposed riverbanks that were formerly underwater with vegetation, which would stabilize those materials in place. So all in all, we wouldn't expect a significant movement of those soft sediments. It is something that post-dam removal and during that monitoring, we'd want to monitor, and that's the area that we'd focus on.
Great. You had mentioned that your team wasn't allowed or didn't get all the way to the dam to test the depths of those soft sediments.
Yes.
But from what you have measured and what you can extrapolate from what you've been seeing, how does this compare to other dams in the area?
As I mentioned during that sediment probing, a lot of those depths are pretty low. So that a lot of that softer sediment is scouring out and likely being mobile during some of the significant events that we've had. It's not as much sediment as we were expecting when we were doing the probing.
Great, good to hear. So I guess just for the board and just given some of my thoughts, first of all, with all due respect to Mr. Jones, I think there are reasons that there is a push for dam removal, going on throughout the region and throughout this country. Ultimately, there are benefits, both ecological and to communities, because of these resilience issues. It creates more resilient ecosystems. It creates more resilient communities as well. Hard structures need to be maintained, and currently Exeter is being held with the bag here. So I want to go back to Paul's, one of Paul's first slides that show all of those interests are absolutely 100% valid. There are tremendous social and ecological interests that go into decisions like this, and we all personally weigh them differently, and none of them should be thrown, under whatever kind of metaphor you want to use, thrown under anywhere. But ultimately, there is reasons to be, looking at these under a microscope. I can tell you from my experience and from other projects I've seen, that this dam removal, if it were a removal, just this dam project, the state of how this dam is right now facilitates that kind of alternative. There are so many challenges I am not seeing here that I am seeing in other projects, be it just tremendous amounts of contaminated sediments, which do accumulate over time and can get worse if the dam ever does need to come out. Flow rates that don't allow for something as easy as vegetated bank stabilization. Even with the fish, although we might not be seeing tremendous returns up the ladder at the moment, we are seeing a huge increase in fish returns to Exeter right now, and we should be thinking about that as well. I'm going to tell you right now that the whole conversation of 100-year storm that 2.5 1,000 this, those are all ultimately amounts that you put into models to just say all right, we live in a giant bathtub, and if the side of the bathtub breaks, how many houses are going to be hurt and how many people are going to be affected? But I can tell you right now that those conditions are changing. and we are seeing more precipitation. I work out in the bay for a living, and that bay got wiped out by last year's precipitation. It was just so astronomically high. So ultimately, I can tell you that we as people want things to stay the same. We live in this like stable state, and we just assume that all our kids are going to grow up in exactly the same situation that we do and we want to give them to. But I can also tell you that things are changing really quickly. The goalposts are moving, and we as a community have to really be able to come together and talk about how we are going to adapt to different conditions.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, the next thing on the agenda is public comment, and I don't think we have any, right? I mean, we don't, other business, we have other business, but we do have public comment, okay. So we can start there, I guess.
My name is Robert Spann. I live in Brentwood, and I would request permission to address you.
You have it.
Thank you. I happen to be in a butter of the river. I'm in an area at Peabody Drive, which has been specifically identified in the feasibility study as one which will have drastic changes to the environment right there, the wetlands, the water surface, the conservation easement. There's a public easement there that where people use to get to the river for kayaking and so forth. That will all change. The river will be lowered by about 5 feet in that area, which will mean there will be very little use for boats or kayaks or anything. But there's tons of things I could say. I appreciate, Mr. Matera, your comment about the trend for dam removal, and I can understand and appreciate that in many instances dam removal might be the proper thing to do, but that doesn't mean it's the proper thing to do at every occasion, and you have to look at the ecological impact of dam removal versus keeping the dam. And I like to think of this as a project. If a developer were coming in and saying, we're gonna put up a project that's gonna destroy 80% of the river surface in Brentwood and 70% of the wetland areas associated with the river in Brentwood, the conservationists would be, they would rise up and stone this person. So we have the reverse conservation issue here. Taking out the dam will have a negative impact in Brentwood. And I appreciate all the work that's been done on the study and that will be done. I wish it had been done before the grant application was made, but so be it. Two points. One on safety and on the flood numbers. I think Mr. San Antonio will agree with this. I think he agreed with it at the public meeting. If there is a 2.5 times 100-year flood, or if there's a 1,000-year flood, that mobile home park and that house on Kingston Road will be inundated even if the dam has been removed. It's the water flow that will come over the dam or without the dam that will cause that damage. So it's not really a safety issue. But my main comment I just want to make is that the NOAA grant application has several misstatements in it. Number one, the grant application, and I'm quoting, says, after years of discussion and evaluation of alternatives, the town has decided dam removal is the best way to address deficiencies at the dam. That's at page BS1. At page 10, the town has determined that the significant expenditure of resources required to maintain the Pickpocket Dam is not sustainable. That's what the grant application says. But we've heard from this committee, we've heard it from the select board, that no decision has been made on dam removal and that all options are on the table. So that's one statement to NOAA which is not accurate. Secondly, the grant application says, under the heading landowner and stakeholder outreach, it says that the studies, VHB, has met with the public to solicit feedback and discuss questions and concerns about the project. That's just not true. They've met with this committee and with the select board, but they've not met with the public. And even landowners and abutters in Exeter, including the Whitings who live right there, were never contacted before this grant application was submitted. Finally, the grant application says that the fish ladder is inefficient to allowing fish passage and that herring stack up at the base of the fish ladder at Pickpocket Dam. Now, we've submitted information to you already that that's just not true. There are no herring stacking up at the base of the dam, and there's no evidence that the Pickpocket Dam is a barrier to fish passage. Mr. Walker talks about dams in general being a barrier to fish passage, but we're talking about the Pickpocket Dam and what is the evidence that it is acting as a barrier. And we cited the Fish and Game reports where the numbers have been quoted here, but those same reports say the fish, the herring, are not reaching the dam, and we don't know why. So I'm not saying that anyone intentionally made false statements, but the facts that have come out since October make it clear that the NOAA grant application needs substantial correction. And it seems to me that the town has three alternatives. One, withdraw the grant application and reapply at a later time with accurate information. Two, correct the record with NOAA immediately before any grant decision is made. Or three, do nothing and hope to obtain federal money under false pretenses. If I were in your shoes, I would want legal advice on the consequences of that alternative. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have anyone else that would like to comment?
Mr. Chair.
Sure.
So
Trevor.
I just want to, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Spann for his comments. I do want to speak to a few of them. One of them specifically is the idea of this habitat transformation, reverse conservation issue. So I work in habitat restoration. I do this as a living, and I can tell you that anything has habitat value to something, right? And when you come in to absolutely any habitat and you want to restore it, restoration is a very philosophical thing that people have. We're saying we either want to bring this back to what was there, or it's a values question, right? But I can tell you that changing any kind of habitat to another habitat is, you're asking values there and benefits. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, there has been shown to be greater habitat value for free-flowing rivers than the scrub shrub wetlands, and in a lot of cases, these other wetlands that we are dealing with. So it's really not this, I think the idea of calling it a reverse conservation issue is a bit of a misnomer, but even the idea of identifying the fact that you're changing one habitat to another is that's just in the spirit of restoration itself. I had another question, if I may.
Sure.
Okay, keep going. So for the idea of the inundation to houses downstream of the dam, are we talking about the idea of a catastrophic failure? Is that ultimately what spurred this letter of deficiency if the dam failed?
The The catastrophic failure of the dam during the 100-year event is what triggered the reclassification to a high hazard dam.
It is, so the catastrophic, so this thing breaks through during full flow.
During full flow, at the peak of full flow, which is typically when an earthen embankment would fail as you start to get that erosion. So the model assumes that that dam fails over an hour during that peak flow and sends a flood wave downstream. And what that was showing is that there was those mobile homes and that residents would have an increase above, like the residents would have an increase of over a foot above their first floor during that catastrophic failure.
So again, and absolutely correct me if I'm wrong in how I'm visualizing this, but to Mr. Span's point of this similar situation of dam in, dam out, and what properties are being affected, the difference is that with the dam out, you're talking about water rise over that precipitation event, as opposed to a catastrophic failure, which would actually create a wave of water from a released dam down the river.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Please.
Please, yes.
Or, yeah.
Because I thought that the breach analysis that VHB had done did not assume a catastrophic failure of the dam, but an overtopping of the dam. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, you're right. That's why it's called a dam breach analysis, because it was assuming that the dam failed during that peak 100-year event.
So in your breach analysis, when you talk about overtopping, that's something different?
Well, the 100-year storm is already overtopping the dam. It's flowing over the earth embankments, which could lead to a rapid failure of the dam. So that erosion coming down, the dam failing, and sending that flood wave downstream. And that flood wave attenuates as it goes downstream, so you see less and less of a difference, and you carry that breach analysis out till you essentially see no difference.
Okay. And the difference at the mobile home parks in the breach analysis was 8 inches?
0.8 of a foot or so, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I have a question. Would you mind putting up the last slide?
The last slide?
The last slide. My name is Crystal Spann. I'm a Brentwood resident.
Last slides.
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
The one before that, thank you. I've been to a number of these meetings. At the very first meeting, a number of questions and comments were written on the whiteboard. And at the public meeting, there were a number of questions, and certainly during this comment period, there have been a number more questions. What I would like to know is, when you review the public comment, then what happens? How do you address those comments and concerns? I haven't heard them addressed. And you say then you will revise the report. I'd like to know.
Paul Velocich again. So we had notes on the board over here at the very first meeting. We heard comments. We had the public information meeting. We had comments and questions. We wrote those down also. We are getting emails through that pickpocket dam email address. Those are all being compiled. Those all will be answered with the final report. You see some of those questions that you've heard through various meetings kind of addressed today. Not all of them, some of them. But there'll be a comment to every one of those questions. At the same time as the feasibility study is finalized. And what is appropriate that needed to be changed in the feasibility study will be changed.
Thank you, Paul. Do I see any other people who would like to make comments in our committee or in the audience?
Mr. Jones.
One other point that I have not seen,
Can you move your microphone closer?
Oh,
Because I'm
sorry.
not sure the recording secretary.
Dan Jones, other point that I have not seen fully addressed is we have a major hazardous waste site right there, the old dump. What is the effect of dropping the water level 6 feet, 8 feet going to have on the flow under and through that dump and the flow out of it?
Anyone can comment on that?
I think
Yeah, I'd like Jake to come up there too, because he did address that even during this presentation. It was addressed at the public information meeting, and it was hit on tonight, but Jake, can you just?
We did look at the overall groundwater flow. You know, that landfill does sit up there on that knoll. The hydraulic gradients on the downstream of the down dam wouldn't change. You know, the groundwater kind of radiates off of the former landfill site. The hydraulic gradients would change upstream of the dam with the lower impoundment. The overall slope, it was a pretty minor change in the overall groundwater gradient that would change. But we did conclude that the overall contaminant load from the landfill to the river would stay the same with dam in or dam out.
Excuse me, is that the long run or the short run? Right now, there's X amount of water in that, well, you call it a knoll, it's well underneath the river level as well.
Sure. What I'm talking about is the overall contaminant load to the Exeter River. Yeah.
But as we drain the existing water out of it, down a few feet, what's the contaminant level likely to be there?
You know, I can't speak to the details of the contaminant. You know, I don't have those off the top of my head, but the overall groundwater flow to the river post dam removal would approximate the same as it is today, which would conclude that the overall contaminant transport would stay the same.
Is that taking into account which part of the dump? The dump that's open underneath or the dump that's hopefully sealed? Because the dump has two different sections.
We reviewed GZA's reports that have been monitoring the dam, looking at, you know, the contaminants, looking at the water levels. We looked at how the water levels would change gradients, what that overall transport and how that would change, and concluded that dam in or dam out, there wouldn't be a big change in the overall transport and load to the Exeter River.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else wants to step forward and
Mr.
make a
Chair,
comment?
if you-
Go ahead.
I'd like to reiterate on Ms. Span's question as well, maybe get Paul back up. In the form that public comments will be released in, if it, I've been able to catch some of the points that I've heard sort of through different process pieces and process points and how they've been addressed, you know, moving forward with newer information. But I'm just wondering, like, that's mostly because I've been plugged in throughout the process. But is there going to be I guess, in what form will those comments, you know, show up in the report? Will it be something that if we know what the comments were, we can track them down, or will it actually be some kind of distilled FAQ?
I did not picture it being in the final report itself. It would be a separate document that has comment or the question and any remark from the town consultants, whoever, with that. number 1 through, right now, I don't know how many I have, 30 or so.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yep, so it'll be a document. I don't picture it inside of the final report. I'm just looking for answers myself right now, but.
Picture that as an appendix.
Okay.
For the feasibility study with public comments, with written response to every question we get.
Great, great.
Well, take back what I just said then. It'll be in that appendix.
That's how I pictured it, but good.
Okay,
Good to hear, thank you.
thank you.
Okay, should I consider a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Bill is so moved. Nico has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All abstaining? I guess we're adjourned.
Thank you for tuning in to Exeter TV. Exeter TV is the town's public and government access channels, available on Comcast channels 6 and 22. Channel 6 is your channel. If you have an idea for a program, want to host your own talk show, or submit a film, we're here to get your content on television. On Channel 22, we bring you live and replay coverage of government meetings and other town updates. A third channel, Blue Hawk Media, is operated by SAU 16 and can be found on Channel 8, with all your school sports, events, and meetings. You can watch Exeter TV online at exeternh.tv, Apple TV, and on Roku. Find us on social media for extra content. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell to get notified about live streams and new content. Tune in to our platforms every other Friday to watch the Exeter Biweekly Report, with recaps of recent events, updates from town departments, and messages from nonprofits in your area. If you head to our website, exeternh.tv, we invite you to sign up to our newsletter to receive monthly updates about new content, upcoming meetings, and more. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch Exeter TV and hope that you tune in to our other content as well.